everyone, and welcome to another episode of Green Pulse, an environmental podcast series by the Straits Times, where we provide you a Southeast Asian perspective on global environmental issues. I'm Ang Ting.
And I'm Shabana Begum. We are here at the SPH Media Auditorium with a cozy audience, and for the sixth and final ST Podcast live session celebrating 180 years of the Straits Times.
You might notice that we are not David or Audrey. Yep, in case you can't tell the difference. But that's because we are originally the hosts of ST's award-winning podcast series, Green Trails. But for this episode, we are taking over Green Pulse. So with terrible floods battering our neighbours and the world settling for yet another watered-down deal at the UN Climate Conference COP30, combating climate change seems like an uphill battle. So can a person's actions actually make a difference? And how can the community shape government policies? Tonight, we have two guests here to tackle this issue. Our first guest is Dr. Alicius Leong. She investigates how public opinions on environmental and health issues are formed. Based at the National University of Singapore, the assistant professor studies how social media is rewriting the way we communicate. Hi, Aline. Good to have you on the show.
Right. Thank you for having me today.
Our second guest is Mr. Veerappan Swaminathan, who carries ground-up solutions with him. He heads the Sustainable Living Lab, a consultancy that helps various groups turn green ideas into innovation. Veera is also co-founder of Repair Kopitiam, an initiative that helps residents fix their household items to reduce waste. Thanks for being here, Veera.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Okay. So Veera, starting with you, there is this observation that the public assumes that the government, the authorities, will solve climate issues for them. Do you agree with this view? Because there are many who say, I don't care, I won't be alive in 2100. So why should this be an issue that I should be careful about? Or I can't do much on my own. So what are your thoughts?
So I think definitely we have the curse of being too efficient. We're a very efficient government. And so a tendency to rely on the government for solutions as well, for all things, not just climate, right? All things really. And to be honest, the government has been doing a lot of things, right? But what all people don't realize is that the sphere of influence that all of us also have, right? So it's not just about what government can do. Organizations are made up of people, ultimately, individuals. And individuals make decisions, and the decisions impact how organizations behave. So individuals have a lot of power. In fact, one of the things that I often remind people is that look at your own sphere of influence, the organization that you work in, the friends that you hang out with, and even the colleagues and so on, or people, family members that you speak to. All these are points of influence, and you can actually make change starting from there.
Right, so often that's kind of a glass half full approach, but I mean, we live in Singapore and most people are quite skeptical about things. So for Ellie, climate change often feels like this issue, this very big issue. I mean, we do think of organizations as people, but sometimes it just feels so abstract. And it often seems like the problems are like very big and a long way off. So do you think that individual actions can really make a difference? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Right. So definitely, I do think that individual actions make a difference, but perhaps just not in the way that most people may think. Right. So I think a single person choosing to switch to a plant-based diet, for instance, is not going to help to save the planet. Right. But it doesn't mean that their actions don't matter, that it's irrelevant. Right. In fact, I think they do play a big role, just like in a more indirect one. Right. So I think through individual small actions, right, you do shape the kind of social norms that are occurring in society, right? And when there is a critical mass, right, when enough people are engaging in these actions, I think corporations, businesses, right, the governments do pay attention. So for instance, we can see increasing uptake of electric vehicles in Singapore, for instance, right? So when companies see, there is increasing consumer demands, right, naturally they would shift, right, in order to meet these demands. And I think also in terms of policy, right, it kind of signals to the government that perhaps, the population is ready for change. Right? As we all know, I think even the best top-down policy requires bottom-up participation and support. Right? So I think through individual actions, it actually signals to them that, perhaps, this is time to implement, policies that will be supported by the masses. So I think, individual actions in themselves cannot transform the system, but I think they do play an important role in facilitating the process that makes this possible.
So in a way, it's like many individual actions coming together, then that sends a signal to the
Yeah,
government.
so I think it's not about individual actions being able to solve the problem of climate change, but we can influence, like businesses, like governments into, playing a bigger role.
So basically, people can also shape policies. It's not just the
Yes.
government. So now, wanting to ask a question related to youths and young people. Young people often feel powerless because climate issues feel too big, and then they get climate anxiety and such. How do we sustain motivation among them and avoid climate fatigue as well?
Right. So I think one of the reasons, people might feel powerless is that, there's this huge like psychological distance with the issue of climate change, right? It feels something very abstract, very far away, but that's not true. I think even in Singapore, we are experiencing the effects of climate change, as you can see through more recent, like frequent floodings, right? Also like bouts of heat waves. So I think kind of tying in this kind of events with the impact of climate change, right? We will be able to kind of send a message that, climate change is something that's immediate, it's proximal to us, right? And it's highly relevant. I think in that case, people would be more willing to take action. And I think another facet of this is about having self-efficacy, right? When people feel like they are capable of taking actions and that their actions do matter, right? So I think, several suggestions would be, perhaps, I think people need to shift their mindset instead of thinking, like, I'm going to change, I'm going to contribute to climate change or like solve this issue, right? I think it's more effective if you think about it in terms of, given, say, my skill set, my expertise in this area, how can I make a difference in a meaningful way within my sphere of influence, right? Kind of breaking down into smaller actions, perhaps, right?
So Vera and Ellie as well, what are some examples of youth-led action and solutions, ground-up solutions that has actually made an impact? It could be in Singapore, Southeast Asia, across the world.
So firstly, given the definition of youth, right? But we have a loose definition in Singapore over here. But I think, so I had the good fortune to participate in the Climate Development Program as one of the chief facilitators last year. And some of the youth from there subsequently were sent to, I think, the previous COP session as well. So a couple of projects came out of there. I think one of the most interesting ones, and forgive me, I don't remember the exact name of it, but what the project was about, I can tell you about that. They had combined basically the religious view on environmentalism and brought that together with some of the climate issues as well. So what they were trying to do is really, work on the narrative level and the worldview level to bring forward climate issues, but framing it from religious context, which may appeal to certain groups of people, especially maybe older folks as well. It might appeal to them. I think that was a very interesting approach, which is not something a government would do. Right? I don't think it's not the first thing a government would do, right? Which also says there's a space actually for individuals, community, and ground-up action to contribute meaningfully.
Hey, it sounds familiar. Is that Climate Interfaith? And
Yes, that was the one. Yeah, that's the one. Thank you.
Ismail is heading it. Yeah,
That's right, Ismail,
I'm
yeah.
familiar with him. Yeah, I was about to state that as an example here as well. So he's now looking to reach out to a few mosques. In the mosques, we have a lot of water-saving things that's already done, but they are now trying to encourage them to have more solar panels, reduce their energy usage, and I think also reduce use environmental playbook that one of the Muslim folks had created as well. So that's very interesting. And that's a very strong example of ground-up movement. Okay.
But actually, I mean, just to chime in, because we have a lot of like solutions and ideas, but what is your sensing of the current climate in terms of the attitude towards climate change in Singapore? Like, do you think that people are positive about it, depressed about it?
I mean, kind of positive about it. It's a bad issue, right? I will say though that we have spent a lot of time in terms of climate mitigation, about carbon reduction and so on. At least the conversation has shifted more towards adaptation. There is a realization that maybe the international community can't get the act together, right? And maybe we have to learn to adapt to the changing climate instead, and we'll look at it more seriously. How seriously? Right now, 5% of climate finance goes in adaptation, just 5%. I think it's going to be more balanced, right? So that shift also manifests in different ways. Today, you find that climate adaptation as a topic is actually being covered more in the news. We're hearing about extreme heat. In fact, you had a previous podcast as well on this topic. I think Jason spoke there as well. But these issues are becoming much more prominent. And these are things that I think we can do something about. And it's definitely changed the nature of the conversation around climate.
Right. So actually, if a youth feels very strongly about like adaptation, it's such a big concept. You can't exactly like go and say, I want to build a seawall. Like what? Yeah, because that's quite impossible. So what can they do?
So adaptation is actually a local issue. Adaptation is always a local issue. See, mitigation may require international treaties and so on, but adaptation is a local issue because adaptation strategies differ by where you are based. Right? If you're based on a coastal area, you will have different strategies. If you're based inland, it's different, right? Depending on the climatic or microclimates that you may have. So we talk about microclimates, right? Depending on where you stay in Singapore, whether you're a low floor HDB, high floor HDB, your heat profile or microclimatic profile inside your house is going to be different as well. Depending on the age of the person and other conditions they have, they respond differently to some of these changes as well. So adaptation is always local, and because it's local, we need local solutions, and you need ground-up solutions.
Right. So if a youth wanted to act on that, like what can they do?
I do want to get Alicia's time to respond as well. But maybe I'll share quickly, right? So the couple of projects right now trying to map the indoor, sort of climatic situation and how it impacts heat health, as they call it. So vulnerable populations we would normally determine as outdoor workers, elderly, right? Also very young children. And in particularly, we talk about elderly, you're looking at the flats and so on, which are not air conditioned, for example. By the way, just as a small point, the air conditioning that we are having is actually not so good for us because we are currently what is called climatically unacclimatized, which means we are actually not going to be used to the extreme heat that's going to come ahead us. In fact, we need to spend if you spend more than 8 hours in an aircon environment, we are considered to be not climatically unacclimatized. So I think this is some of the things that we have to consider, right? So is it a good idea to put aircons in schools? Or we should probably go the other way around, right? Let the kids actually encourage them to spend time outdoors as well.
Yeah. Okay, so Ellie, when we talk about taking action against climate change, what often comes to mind are people protesting. So we've talked about adaptation. Now we want to talk about another form of action, which is a lot more stronger worded, which is protesting, showing up at a government building, for example. But these things can often be taken negatively. But you still use that as a strong point, as a strong way to get their messages across. So what are some constructive ways where a person's action to fight climate change has improved the system through a protest?
Right. So one example I can think of is Greta Thunberg's Fridays for Future. Right. I think what started out as a movement became like a global sort of like youth climate activism, right, where they actually demanded action from like governments, from institutions, from businesses. It actually worked pretty well, right? And I think kind of like surfacing the issue to the public and like reminding society of like what's important.
Okay. But there is one other aspect of protests and climate action. I wouldn't really call it climate action, but recently, over the past couple of years, there's been this trend of, even Greta Thunberg has done it last week, young people in the name of climate change, they have been throwing soup and paint and trying to, in a way, vandalize paintings. I think Greta Thunberg last week poured some dye into the canals of Venice. So to me, it doesn't seem like climate change. It seems a bit of a destructive action. But do you think these forms of action, do you think young people have to really resort to these forms of action to get their governments to take action?
Well, I think, people act in that way due to the urgency of the situation, right? I think they want to create that sort of shock value. So people would pay attention. And I think it's successful in the sense that, they get public attention, they get media coverage. But whether or not this actually translates into climate action, right, I think is questionable, right? Because I think it's sort of dangerous right? I think that it can potentially backfire on them, right? I think when you destroy, like cultural artifacts, public spaces, things that we collectively value, right? It turns into public outrage, which actually, ironically, I think might actually, cause people to shift their attention away from the climate message, and people are less likely to be sympathetic to their cause, right? And also, I think it creates, the impression that these activists are disrespectful, that they are reckless, and I think this undermines their credibility in the eyes of the public. And I think taken together, the public is unlikely, to be more willing to, support climate policies because of these actions, right? I think there are more socially responsible and more constructive ways, right, that you can sort of like protest or make a statement, right? I think one way would be more, I guess, through creative outlets such as, like painting murals, for example, having like art installation, right, immersive experience where you can educate and I think inspire the public, right, without alienating them. And I think it's also more effective if you actually target the source, right, the people who are actually creating most of these emissions, right, be it, the government or like corporations, right? So I think rather than, I don't know, like what is the purpose of destroying an artwork that has little in terms of their contribution to these emissions or climate change?
Yes, very well put. Veera, do you have anything to add about that?
Yeah, so basically change I think happens at several levels, right? One, it happens on the things that you do and the events that you have and the, let's say, shock value and action and so on. Then change also happens below that in the systems patterns layer. And then it happens below that in terms of the worldviews that people maintain. And then it happens in the narratives and the metaphors that we tell ourselves about how the world is. So change or effective change can actually happen at multiple levels. And to truly shift something, you need to actually change all four levels of it. So I think like the point on murals and narrative changing, that's very important, as is lobbying the government as well. And showing alternatives way of doing things, as is talking to your colleagues, friends, and so on, shifting their mindset, shifting their worldviews, as is doing the very visible public stuff, right? I mean, we run repair programs very publicly. Do we actually make a dent on the e-waste problem in Singapore from a number of items saved standpoint? The answer is no. But what did that result in? It resulted actually in a lot bigger public acceptance for the EPR policy when it came out at that point in time, because people were saying that I understand the problem, I recognize the government's need to do something about it, and I'm going to support that, right? Sometimes that supports what you need, right? Then the rules can change. Otherwise, we will continue to be stuck in certain places. So it's not always, in a very obvious way, or do you reduce 10 items or do you divert 10 items from the landfill? Do you reduce 100 kilos of waste? It's not so direct when it comes to change at this level.
So actually a question to, maybe Ellie first. So is there any area like in Singapore when it comes to climate change or like environmental issues that you wish there will be a change that happens?
I think in terms of that, right, in terms of change, are you talking about more like behavioral?
Behavioral or any issues. So for example, you brought up waste, right, which is one mammoth problem in Singapore. Is there any particular issue that you think more can be done?
Right, so I think recycling is one of them, right, and as well as like reducing food waste, right. I think those are things that we can do at the individual level, right, kind of like by changing our habits, for instance.
And Veera, how about you?
I was a bit distressed to learn they're going to clear more forest. I think the news came out maybe today, yesterday, but they're clearing more forest. And I think the way we are approaching our development policy, I think environment always sits at the bottom of the totem pole, right? And I think it's very evident in the way it's being done, and then that can change. Yeah, it doesn't have to be that way.
So Ellie, you mentioned recycling, and that is one of the two topics I wanted to get into as well, because our domestic recycling rate is really low. So, and that is one way in which the public can also do their part. That's one way of taking climate action as well. So, how can we spur more recycling? Or do we have to resort to fines, CCTVs near the blue bins because it's very polluted, or contaminated, or monetary schemes? Because next year, there will be the beverage container return scheme, for example, which will involve having a deposit like 10 cents returned to you when you send in a can or a bottle for recycling. So how else do you think our dismally low recycling rate can increase?
Right. So I think to encourage people to recycle, firstly, you need to make it easy, right? People would take action and they will adopt new habits if, it's convenient for them, right? So, I think that comes in the sense of, clear instructions on how to recycle properly, having intuitive bin designs, for instance, having bins in accessible areas, right? Because I think convenience is it's not a luxury, right? But it's a necessity and the foundation for good habits, right? Aside from that, I think if recycling is much more difficult than just throwing away the trash, I think it's likely that people would default to the convenient option. And I think also kind of having them in very visible place might help, right? I think because this would help to, I guess, develop social norms around recycling, right? If we see other people recycling, we're more likely to recycle as well, right? We might think that, others would also expect us to recycle, right? And I think also making the impact of recycling more visible, right? Because I think currently it's kind of like a black box, right? It's like you throw away like a can into the recycling bin and then that's it, right? I think kind of showing the processes of what happens after that, like what are they being used for, how much energy they help to, save, could be a way to motivate and to empower individuals because they feel that, their small actions are actually contributing to this larger cause, right? In terms of, CCTVs and having fines, right? I think they should be the last resort, right? Rather than being used as a strategy to encourage people to recycle. And they should be used where it really matters. For example, like illegally dumping, right? Or I guess like repeated contamination of recycling bins, right? So, I think they should be only enforced, right? When there are already clear systems, right? Easy systems and incentives that are in place, right? So I think the beverage
container return scheme.
Yeah,
Very
that
long
scheme.
acronym,
Yeah, would be a good way, right? I think kind of providing small rewards can help to reinforce good behavior, right? And I think over time, this could develop into good habits that people do unconsciously.
Yeah.
And actually, once again, that's like a government, like the government has to take action, right? But actually, I want to move on to what you brought up about forests, because that often feels like a very top-down decision, right? It's in the like the URA master plan. You can't really change anything. And in terms of like, I guess it's only so much you can protest in Singapore or write on Facebook or write on Instagram. So I guess what sort of, my question being is like, what sort of alternative space, or is there like a constructive solution that people can voice out that sort of like concern about what's being done to forests?
By the way, the master plans actually have a consultation process where you can give feedback and so on. I mean, the best example of a success case in this was the Rail Corridor project and Chek Jawa project as well. If you recall, those were actually supposed to be reclaimed and redeveloped, those locations. So what changed over there, right? Or what was possible over there was basically people got together, right? People got together and lobbied hard. And offered alternative uses. So here's the thing, right? When you want to tell somebody to change something, you can't just say stop doing that. You got to offer a alternative. You got to offer a viable alternative. For Chek Jawa, the alternative offered was that let's convert this space, into a sort of conservation area. We can make it into a tourist attraction. It will help STB, whatever. Right? So there's all these things that was put up over there, and those proposals are taken seriously, right? So the thing I would say is that, of course, one needs time in order to understand the issue deeply and then figure out what are good alternative sort of measures we can propose as an alternative to development of the space, right, for housing or whatever other purpose and so on. So there needs to be a plan, right? I think organizing people, getting to that plan, that's not easy. Easier said than done. But in some cases, it has been done. And in this case, I think people are keen and interested. It matters enough to people, it will also be done. So.
I think we've seen some positive examples like Dover Forest. They actually, the government did respond by saving like half of it for now and that sort of thing. So yeah, but actually, for a lot of these like consultations, sometimes it can feel very opaque because who even gets to attend these consultations? Are there ways or that, or resources?
It's public. You go to URA website, it's there.
but you need to know
Yeah,
how
like,
to get
correct.
to
You
the
need to
UIA
know
website.
that the website exists and actually go to the website. And I think a lot of these things it's there, but then we are so caught up in our daily lives that we don't, right? I mean, to be honest, I find out about these things because I'm in those chat groups that circulate information like this, and then you find out about it and you do something about it. But I guess for the man on the street, it's not going to be an obvious thing. Definitely more can be done. Maybe this is a good forum to actually mention that such things exist. Right? You can go to government websites and you can actually find when the consultations are happening. Yeah.
Yes, I think usually the public would hear about a forest being cleared or something through the newspapers or through like Reddit, for example. Yep. So now we've talked about recycling, we've talked about clearing of forests. So I wanted to go into another, potentially controversial topic, something that will definitely have the public's understanding and the public's support will be very crucial for this, and that is if Singapore decides to adopt nuclear energy. So, Singapore has been doing so much over the past few years. I think slowly they will have to start building up understanding and everything. So how can Singapore gain public support when it comes to setting up a nuclear power plant here? We haven't made a decision yet. The country hasn't, but
Important
Maybe
disclaimer.
we could mention that, right?
yeah, but the topic of using it has been heating up, with SMRs and the newer, supposedly safer technologies as well. So what do you think will it take for, the public to understand nuclear energy better?
Right. So I think kind of having early engagement with the public is important. The public should feel like they're part of the conversation, right? That they're not being sidelined, right? I think having public consultations, like small group dialogues, right? Or having forums where people can, ask questions, to debate with each other, right? To raise concerns would be good, right? And necessary. Right, so I think also, perhaps having advisory boards that can help to mediate between people who feel very strongly against the issue and, experts or government authorities, right? I think having this in place would help to diffuse like any potential conflicts, right, before they escalate, right? And also people wouldn't feel like, maybe they have to turn to the media or social media to air, their grievances or like their unhappiness about the issue. Right. And another one, I think this process, helps to make it more transparent and build trust with stakeholders involved. Right. And another one, I think, is to highlight perhaps the benefits of having like nuclear power plants in Singapore. Right. For one, I think it helps, for example, Singapore to achieve energy security. Right. Right. That we will have like a stable, reliable supply of energy. Right. This could also, like create jobs. Right. When the nuclear sector is like set up, right? And more directly, personal benefits like maybe reducing electric bills, right? I think those could be things that motivate people to support, right? And I think clearing misconception is one very important one as well, right? I think previous research has shown, I think in part due to earlier events like, the Fukushima nuclear accident, like Hiroshima, people have misconceptions that, having like nuclear power plant, right, produce like, harmful radiation during operations or that the technology can be weaponized, which is not true, right? So I think those feed into the fears and, people's resistance towards nuclear energy in Singapore.
So basically, take control of the narrative in this, in a
so
nice
much.
way.
Nice way. But also, I think it's important to have conversations to know what people are concerned about, right? Whether or not they raise, issues that the government may need to pay attention to or to think about, alternative like emergency like preparedness.
Yeah, I think we do see that with like the coastal conversations about when they're thinking of adapting to rising sea levels. There's this forum for people to air their concerns and ideas. So the same you could apply to nuclear energy. Yeah. So I guess it would be good to end on like a forward-looking note. So which is what is one thing that you think a young person can do to make their lives more sustainable? Maybe start with you, Veera.
Again, look to your sphere of influence. I think the advantage a young person always has is time. You will outlive everybody. Right? you outlive even the decision makers who are deciding otherwise, right? So you outlive everyone. So your time is on the side. And definitely look at sphere of influence. One day you will lead organizations, maybe sooner rather than later. And Yeah, I know it's like all these small things always add up, and you can't just think of yourself as an individual, right? We are all part of a system. We can shift the system.
What about you, Ali?
Right. For me, I think kind of building on your individual actions, right? How to kind of extend that further, right? So for instance, like influencing, say, your peer network and mobilizing them, right? I think using your social capital to send across, this kind of messages, your values related to these issues, I think would create a more lasting impact. And also, I guess, more civic participation, right? And being involved in, say, like civic consultations where you can air, your feedback, your ideas, which will in turn actually, perhaps contribute to policy change, right? So I think this creates more lasting impacts beyond, just yourself.
Thank you. I feel like asking. So Shabana, what do you think? Like,
I'll answer during the Q&A. Maybe.
oh, okay, sure. Okay. Well, that wraps it up for Green Pulse. Thank you, Ellie and Vera, for coming to the show. Once again, I'm Ang Ting.
And I'm Shabana Begum. You can email us your thoughts on this episode. Links to our articles are in our show notes. Thanks for tuning in.